Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to be back into the episode, or second episode of the Grazil-Madain War breakdown. And today we're going to be discussing about the war and the battles that led to the war and during the war, and then within our. Hopefully, if we get through the battles, we may do the final episode, which is the aftermath and the resolution. So let's go ahead and start off with the battles. On Thursday, June 13th, 2024, around noon, the Brazilian battle fleet, led by Admiral Eduardo Veleras, arrived along the coast of the Guelo harbor and began bombarding the ports of Manaus, sinking all of their naval vessels so that the Madian navy couldn't counterattack, which proved to be effective because after the bombardment, Eduardo told his radio operator to send a message to the other fleet of Brazilian ships carrying soldiers that they could start the invasion, and that the Madian fleet has been annihilated and shouldn't be a problem. Meanwhile, Alejandro Venezuela heard about the Brazilians sinking his ships at the Guelo harbor, which angered and surprised him. He knows that if his fleet has been destroyed, that they would try to land their soldiers on the southeast side of his country, where it is open for them to land their troops. With quick reaction, Alejandro called his generals in the south to set up defenses where they were and to be prepared for invasion. The soldiers quickly went to the east, where they feel the Brazilians would land, and hurriedly made sand barriers along with setting up their artillery and tank defenses along the beachhead. The beachhead that these men would be defending is called Guero Beach. The second Brazilian fleet, led by Captain Emmanuel Roberto Mandiquez, received their orders to land the soldiers, which within the span of 10 minutes, the ships landed on Guero Beach. The Madians were ready for the ships to drop the ramps and let the soldiers come pouring out on the beach. And soon enough, they did. As the Brazilian soldiers ran through the beach, they were met with Madian artillery, soldiers, and mines. The Brazilians fought the Madian defenders for a few minutes until the gunfire from the Madian positions stopped. It turns out, as the Madians were trying to fight off the Brazilians, a few of their men were being killed by Brazilian tanks and marksmen, which made the commanding officer of the Madian unit, General Juan Chavez, to call a decisive retreat to gain higher ground from the Brazilians. The Brazilians, who would later capture Madian position, turned it into a checkpoint center for their army, and despite these two battles being their first victory, they had to be alert for Madian maneuvers and ambushes. Since Chavez's men retreated from their position due to being outnumbered, he decided to hold defensive in a local town called El Mata. Chavez's plan is to hold the town, and as he waits for the Brazilians to attack, he would call for reinforcements along with some armor support. Alejandro received Chavez's call and told him that he would send a small unit of men along with 4 tanks to aid his position, which Chavez replied to Alejandro, thanking him for providing the exact reinforcements he needed. As for the Brazilian army, led by Colonel Antonio Vendettas, who captured the position, decided to camp in the position and wait for supplies along with reinforcements. And once he has them in his possession, he would launch an offensive on local Madian towns and cities, capturing them. The day that they would start the operation would begin in the morning of the next day. On the morning of Friday, June 14th, 2024, the Brazilians launched their assault on the town of El Mata, where Chavez's forces were holding defensive. The Brazilians bombarded the town with mortars and rifles, and in return they would receive counterfire from Madian soldiers and tanks. The first wave of defense was demolished by the Brazilians, which gave them an opening. Colonel Vendettas led a massive charge against the remaining defenses, which caused 4 of the Madian tanks destroyed and inflicted heavy casualties on Chavez's men, where he had to retreat again to higher ground. This was another victory for the Brazilians, but Colonel Vendettas knows that the Madians are saving their forces for the next counteroffensive. He ordered his radio operator to contact their fleet to send in more soldiers along with armor and artillery support. And as for the remainder of his men, he ordered them to reposition their defenses facing north to the Chadamala Mountains. Meanwhile, as the Grazilians set up defenses in Almata, Chavez called Alejandro and told him that the Grazilians had taken over Almata and are preparing to hold defensive within the town. Alejandro, angered by Chavez's cowardice, told him that if he retreated one more time with a lot of men again, he would discharge him and replace him with someone else with greater military experience. After the conversation ended, Chavez started to outline a plan to counterattack the Grazilians in the town that they had failed to defend. He realized that the Grazilians only have a fleet of ships, tanks, and infantry to their advantage, but one thing they don't have is an air force, like his country does. With quick thinking again, Chavez contacted Colonel Miguel Senta of the Madain Air Base near the capital of Mapaz and requested for some air support. Colonel Senta agreed to provide him air support, but he needed to know when does he want to use their airstrike, and Chavez replied, tomorrow at noon. Colonel Santa told Chavez that his pilots would be ready by then, and that all he needed to do was call him to send them out. Chavez thanked Colonel Santa and ended the conversation. Since he has the Air Force on dial and ready to strike tomorrow on the Grazilians, he also needed another ally to help him with the ground assault. So he contacted another general that was 3 hours away from his location, which would be General Marco Cento Abuelia. Abuelia was stationed in a fort known as Fort Cameron, which was near the Chadamala Mountains, and the captured town of Almata. Abuelia asked Chavez why he called him, and Chavez replied saying that he needed his men to aid him on a counteroffensive against the Grazilians within the town of Almata. Abuela agreed to help him and said that he and his forces would meet them at their holding station, in which Chavez agreed to Abuelia's command and told his men that Abuelia's forces will be on their way to aid them on their assault tomorrow. As for Vendettas' forces, they have finished setting up their positions and luckily had the reinforcements on time as well. Vendettas hoped that this will be enough to hold the town, but he also knows that the Madains could use their other weapons as well to defeat them, especially their air force. So he ordered soldiers to set up anti-aircraft gun towers facing the Chadamala Mountains as well. As the day turned into night, both leaders realized that they may need some help for their cause, which gave them both the idea to write letters to any country that could help them win the war. Their letters have been sent out to both, and both of them hoped they would have help in time. When the next day came and the clock was at noon, the Madain forces launched their attack by sending air force to bombard the Grazilians in the town. The Grazilians immediately went to the defenses, and the others that were in an anti-aircraft tower began to open fire and shoot down 4 Madain planes. After the air force was defeated, they began to send in the tanks to weaken the first defense for their soldiers to infiltrate. The Madain tanks have successfully weakened the first defense and destroyed 2 Grazilian tanks, but they were also destroyed in the middle of the battle due to the Grazilians firing their artillery on them. The final wave was sent to destroy the artillery and push the Grazilians out of the town. Both sides fought for a few minutes. The Madains managed to destroy the artillery, but as they continued to pursue, the Grazilians were losing men drastically. And with no other choice, both General Chavez and Abuelia told their forces to retreat. The Grazilians, seeing the Madains retreat, were shocked. They thought that they would continue to push, but regardless, they saw it as another victory. Even though they won, they too lost men, but regardless of the casualties, they still have enough men to fight. The leader of Madain was getting anxious and worried that the Grazilians were getting closer to the capital, and it would be a matter of time for his country to win a decisive victory. Yesterday afternoon, both leaders received a call from their allies saying that they would be able to help, which made both leaders very happy. But it also would also mean that they would have to wait for them to arrive, which for Slovakia won't take long. But as for Tenoria, it would take a couple of days for them to arrive. The Tenorians have already sent their ships to Budapest, but are currently ported in Bulgaria to refill their ships with fuel to continue their passage route. The Slovakians, meanwhile, are passing through to reach Madain, which won't take very long for them to arrive before the Tenorians. When the Galvanians arrived in Madas, Alejandro told them to help reinforce their defenses in the north because he had a feeling that the Grazilians retreated and are planning to attack them in the north. Tenarians had finished refueling their ship and made their way to Budapest as planned. Once the Tenarians reached Budapest, the general of the Tenarian forces, Hussein Polat, radioed Colonel Fernandez of the Brazilian forces and told him that they are willing to help him and that they were planning on attacking the Madains on the northern border. And once they have broken through, he would call them back to let them know that they can launch their assault on the capital of Matapaz, where they would join forces and defeat the Madains. Palat's forces attacked the northern border, in which Slovakian and Madain forces opened fire on them, but despite having artillery and soldiers holding the line, they were no match for Tenaria's tanks or its light infantry. A few Slovakian and Madain soldiers fought till they couldn't take no more casualties, and only a small group of men retreated. Alejandro heard about the Tenarians attacking the northern border and capturing it, which made him realize that Grazil made an alliance with Tenaria. For this last-ditch effort to try and preserve his country from a monarchist rule, he ordered all of his remaining soldiers and their allies, the Slovakians, to set up defenses and prepare for siege in the capital of Mapaz. After 3 days of preparation for the battle for Mapaz began during noon on Saturday, June 22nd, 2024. Both sides fought within an hour, and the resolution resulted with the Brazilians capturing the city and Alejandro surrendering due to losing a lot of men and devastation caused by the enemy. Both leaders decided to go to Kandahar and discuss terms of treatment and trade, which would be around 1:45 p.m. As for the Slovakians that joined on Madaz's side or favor, because they were called to help them, they too suffered a lot of casualties and supplies. Even though they didn't fight as long as the Madains, they have decided to go home to their own country and not to interfere with another war unless it really involves them or until they're fully ready to take on another international conflict. As for the Tenarians, they did the same, but before they left, the colonel of the Brazilian forces gave them chests of gold and chocolate as a reward for their services and aid to their cause, in which they were happy and proud that they won their first victory in an international conflict. Both leaders decided to meet in the city of Brussels and made their way inside the Parliament office of President Lumiere Leon of Kandahar, where they would wait for him to arrive so they can complete their arrangements of peace. After a few minutes of waiting, Lumiere finally arrived and allowed the two nations to state their terms. After a few minutes of deliberating and discussing equal terms between Grazil and Madas, Lumiere decided to make an act where if Grazil occupies any country or territory, he must follow the terms that were written by Emmanuel Moretas, so that both Grazil and the other country can share equal terms of peace and trade. The two leaders grabbed their pens and began to sign the treaty, ending the war with a happy note. Or so they say. After the two leaders signed the paper and shook hands, they returned to Madas and started their project of rebuilding the war-torn cities that were caused from the beginning to the end. The total number of soldiers or casualties that were from this war was 377. So, this is what happened after when Brazil won their victory of the war. But this is the treaty that both Grazil and Madas signed. It is called the Brazilian Imperial Occupation Act, written on the same day that the war was over, which ended on June 22nd, 2024. If you didn't catch that from the Battle of Mapaz. It says here, this document is a series of terms that the leader of Brazil, King Bruno Santos I, made for any territory, colony, or province that they claimed or occupied through diplomatic meetings or resolutions of any war that they weren't involved in that resulted with them winning or achieving peaceful negotiations. Before signing this document, you must read the terms that are provided for you down below. So these are the Grazilian occupation terms numbered 1 through 7. So we're going to start with number 1. Any country that has lost a war to Brazil must share a quarter of their supply, such as food, water, or medical appliances, by 25%. Seems great, right? But wait, let's continue. Term 2. If the country complies, 50% of their resources would be returned as fair for both countries. Failure to comply or share resources would be considered a threat to Brazil and its kingdom's economy. So it went from 25% of giving the materials to now 50% altogether. Well, actually, that seems pretty good because Brazil's offering 25, Madon's offers 25, so therefore that counts as 50%. Okay, well, so far that's okay. Now, term 3. Both civilians and soldiers will be tried in both Brazilian and local law. If any occupied civilians or soldiers commit any crimes, they would have local court trials, and if any Brazilians commit any crimes, they would have Brazilian court trials. So basically, they're saying, alright, a Brazilian cannot be charged under Madain law if a Brazilian committed crimes in Madaus. But the Brazilian can be tried in Brazilian court, while if a Madain commits crimes onto a Brazilian soldier or in Brazil itself, they would have to be tried on the Madain law. So basically, a sharing court system and power, even though they don't share the same court, they have to be shared separate courts, which is very interesting. If Brazil goes to war with another country, the country, colony, or territory that Brazil owns must join in on Brazil's favor. Refusal will be considered as an act of treason unless there are medical excuses for not joining the war. Now, that part is very controversial. So, that basically says, okay, Brazil owes Madaus. Madaus doesn't want to go to war, but if Brazil's at war with another country and the Brazilian lost a lot of men, the Madains have to enlist for Brazil, and that they have to fight regardless, unless they have a medical excuse to not join the war. But if you don't have a medical excuse, or if they find you fit to fight in the war, you're going to war anyway. You're fighting for your quote-unquote country, but also for your king, because he basically occupies you. Next, term 5. And guys, this is all just an act. This is not really real, but you know, you get what you're saying. I'm trying to relate to you guys how the Madains feel, even though they lost the war and had to sign this document, what they might be going through after this document was signed. Term 5. If resources are overproduced, they must be harvested immediately, and if the same resources are oversold, the product should be reduced by 60%. Payment. Term 6. Payment for those who worked in the military or workforces will vary depending on the age of or years served per individual. So basically, if you're a worker who served or worked in the military or the industrial factories for, let's say, 10 years, you'll get a raise of $600. But if you started working there, or you've worked there for 5 or less, you'll be paid $50. Ain't that some controversial stuff too? So that's 2 factors that they are having to struggle with for the next few months, but they have no choice. And not to mention, Brazil is powerful now than the Madains, and the Madains have lost a lot of men, so they couldn't retaliate. If you're wondering, why didn't they retaliate? Why didn't they start a revolution? Because looking at term 7, it says here, religion and society can continue as it were, as long as there is no plotting or gatherings of revolution against Brazil and its king. So basically, they could have done so, but then again, they didn't, because they were afraid that Brazil would find out, and they would probably be, punished severely. So these are the terms that the Madains have to deal with. And even though Madaus had been under Brazilian rule for the past 4 months now, that recently they have, well, actually 3 months, and they were just liberated in October. But if you want to learn more about that, then check out my poll about which event you want me to cover, and then we'll start off from there. But anyway, this is all for today. Thank you for watching the second episode of the Grazil-Madain War Breakdown, and I will see you guys next time.